Bold and raw perspectives of local politics. Important information which impacts our community, nation, and world. Exposing truth, transparency, and getting to the heart of relevant issues that you just won't see in the clickbait media. And always keeping it real. It's the Michelle Tanner Podcast.
But I won't back down.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Michelle Tanner Podcast. Want to give a quick shout out first to the St. George Sunrise Market. If y'all haven't checked them out yet, they are there at Segmiller Park near Little Valley every Saturday from 10 to 2. Take your whole family. It's an awesome farmers market. Great, patriotic, family-friendly environment. So many awesome vendors. Definitely, if you are a small business owner yourself and are interested in a venue, definitely check them out on their website or just come and show up and support all of our awesome local businesses here in St. George. Again, that's the St. George Sunrise Market. All right, y'all. I am excited today. I have with me here via Skype. One of these days, she's going to get down here for an in-person so we can dance to Shakira. This is my favorite Shakira lover, Monica Wilbur, who is running for state school board up in District 10 in Northern Utah. And I've got to tell you guys, state school board, this is such an important race. I mean, we're talking about our children's education. I believe there's really few things more vital to the future of this country than what our children are learning. They are literally the future of this country. And so, Monica, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for being willing to put yourself out there to run for state school board.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's great to be on with you finally and to be able to talk about all things education and maybe a little Shakira if we get the time. So
I love it. Yeah. So I got to know Monica a little bit while working on some state legislation together to help protect children. And so I have a lot of admiration for you, Monica, because I know from working with you directly how sharp you are, how intelligent you are, how you know the things that are truly affecting our children in education, and not only what's affecting them, but how to address that, because that's such a vital thing. I think a lot of people realize that there's things going on that are wrong in our children's education, but then how do we tackle that? What can we actually do? So maybe just first take a few minutes to introduce yourself and how you even got involved running for state school board in the first place.
Okay, that's a great question. Well, I used to be a teacher. I used to teach high school English and coach debate, and that was a really great experience. I only did that for a few years before I went into the private sector and became a writer, a technical editor to do web development and other things like that. But I got back into the school scene with my own kids. I served on a couple of community councils. I volunteered in my kids' classes, and I started to notice things back then. And we're talking the early, mid 2010 period there, where we, as a state, started transitioning to Common Core. I felt like there were a lot of things that were not going well in the classroom. So I had concerns about my own children. I put them in a charter school. I homeschooled them. Dual enrolled my kids. They've been involved in concurrent enrollment. So long and short of it is that when COVID hit, I, had heard about, obviously I saw the effect of masks on my kids and had heard kind of like how it was just really poorly affecting a lot of kids' educations, and they weren't going to ease up on the masks. And so, went to go speak, or not speak, but I went to just go show up at a local board meeting. And I ended up speaking. I didn't know I was speaking at the time. It was kind of a surprise. And so kind of put something together. And I was the only one who ended up speaking to the issues that the parents were there to hear. And it just kind of got me involved in this whole movement to help improve education in our state. And started working in and following the State Board of Education and working on a lot of policy issues that were coming up at the board, and reaching out to board members. There was one board member in particular who was very willing to listen and to work with me, and she's been great. That's Natalie Klein, and so together we've just been working together and trying to help improve education for the kids in Utah.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that you do with educating parents about what's going on in our education system. What would you say to those people? Because I'll hear frequently, even from elected officials, they'll say, oh no, critical race theory doesn't exist in Utah. Oh no, we're not teaching any of this social emotional learning in our classrooms, or we're not teaching any gender ideology, or, and on. You hear them just deny over and over that these things actually aren't going on, when yet we have evidence that it in fact is. What would you say, though, to those people who are still denying that there has been an infiltration of our education system?
Well, I would say, first of all, this is happening. I've seen it in my own children's educations. When you have a son who's asked to do a privilege walk, or when you have another son who is told that they won't read a history book that's written by two straight white males, that they're going to read books from different perspectives. I think people who are denying that this is happening are splitting hairs a lot of times with the language. They say, we're not teaching CRT, and they're talking about the academic like subject areas of critical race theory. Like, we're not teaching this discipline. Well, no, you are not teaching kids, Kimberly Crenshaw, and you're not teaching kids Ibram X. Kendi. You're not teaching them the bell hooks, the authors of this theory, but you are applying the theory in the classroom to the instruction, to the curriculum, to the assessments, and to the overall school environment. And, I've seen it plenty with my own kids. I've seen lots of evidence of it from my local district and through the state board itself. Something I failed to mention before is that a couple of years back, I was the recipient of a very expensive GRAMA request, and the GRAMA request is a Government Records Access Management Act request. It's like FOIA for Utah, and so that contained thousands and thousands of documents, emails, and I ended up going through that. I guess I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I felt like, oh, this is very interesting, and so I got to see a lot of these back channel communications that were happening at the State Board of Education that not even board members were aware of. And there were multiple discussions of how, CRT, DEI, I got to see the genesis of this, and it's really been implemented in Utah schools over time through legislation. I mean, we saw this creeping in back in 2016 and even earlier. And it's just kind of reached, you could say, a bit of a peak, but we're not done with it yet. It's, just because we pass a piece of legislation doesn't mean DEI has disappeared. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's been embedded so much in the daily processes, policies, programs, practices in the schools that it's almost like, trying to extract sugar from a cake after you've baked it. It's kind of, it's going to be very, very difficult going forward because it's become part of the school culture.
Yeah, great point. And what do you see is the actual role of the state school board? I was at a debate recently for a state school board, a separate district from yours, and the incumbent, of course, was trying to say, and the incumbent happens to vote almost all the time with Democrats, but nonetheless was saying that, oh no, we don't have any of these things in our schools, as we discussed with the social emotional learning and DEI. And, as soon as the legislator told us what to do, then we then took that, and that's what we do. Those are our marching orders. And I thought that the opponent actually made a really good point. And they said, actually the fact that the state legislator had to come out and tell you to keep this garbage, these pornographic books out of our elementary schools shows that that was an absolute failure on the side of the school board. So where does the school board's role actually lie in the curriculum, in the classroom, in the pornographic books that we know are still in some of our Utah classrooms? What can you guys do as a board?
Well, that's a great question. Article 10, Section 3 of the Utah State Constitution gives the general control and supervision of all legislative programs and schools that have been designated by the legislature to the state board to oversee. So that's the responsibility of the State Board of Education. They get to control and supervise everything that the legislature gives to it that falls underneath K-12 education. It's a pretty broad scope. I would love to see the state board start setting the tone and enforcing the laws that are there on the books to protect children from sexually explicit materials, from harmful ideologies. Unfortunately, a lot of this there are loopholes in legislation, and that allows the state board to creatively interpret where it decides to step in and how it decides to send the message, what guidance it gives to the districts, and then the districts just run with it from there. Back in June of 2022, the state board passed a piece of model policy, basically, on sensitive materials that was supposedly based on the sensitive materials law that had passed then. But it gave broad latitude to the schools and to the districts to basically do more to protect pornographic materials in the schools than to prevent them. It was a horrible piece of legislation. There was only one board member on the board at the time that voted against that, and that was Member Klein. But all of the incumbents that are running this year, so you have Kristen Norton, you have Matt Hymas, you have, Brent Strait, Carol Lear, Molly Hart, and then, Jim Moss, but now he's out of the race. So but all of them voted for that. And in fact, it was Matt Hymas who actually used that policy and substituted another policy by Member Klein that would have held the schools and the districts to that bright line protection. If something's pornographic, we don't leave it on the shelves. And while it's being reviewed, we don't let kids still access it with parental permission like this other model policy allowed. And we don't allow the districts to continue to police themselves. The state board would have come in and had the final say. The buck would have stopped with them for getting these pornographic materials out of the schools. So that could have been done 2 years ago, but the board rejected it.
Wow, that is insane. And you're saying Natalie Klein is actually the only one who pushed for that, to actually get the pornographic books completely out of the schools.
Yes, absolutely. But she had proposed her model policy, and then Member Hymas made a substitute motion to propose this other policy that allowed that did more to protect the porn than it did to prevent it. And then they all voted for it, except for Klein. Yeah.
Wow. So what is your take on Title IX and all of this nonsense we're seeing essentially going on right now, spurred from President Biden all the way down? And we're starting to see some states file lawsuits and say that they're not going to enforce Title IX in the way that the president is trying to say we have to. What is your position on that?
Okay, well, back in June of 2023, the organization that Natalie Klein and I formed, which is Higher Ground, we actually were I think we were the only one to get a recording of this Title IX webinar that the Department of Ed had put on to basically discuss safe and inclusive schools and what the Title IX provisions will look like in practice in the classrooms. It was absolutely horrifying. I believe it was the Daily Caller who picked up our story. We just tweeted it out there or put it out on X. And they picked up the story and they had written a series of articles on it. But it's absolutely horrible when, basically gender identity and sexual orientation get conflated with protections that were intended to be based on biological sex solely. But that's what the Biden administration has done. Utah missed out on an opportunity, I think it was back in 2021, to hop on a 20-state lawsuit that would have prevented the state from implementing Biden's proposed changes. So we had states way back when who saw these changes coming down the road, and they acted very quickly, proactively to fend off the changes. We did not. We did later on sign on to, I think it was like a 22-state letter opposing the changes, but we didn't get on the lawsuit as early as we could have. And that's unfortunate. So now we're kind of playing catch up. And this will affect our kids negatively. But the Biden administration is pouring a lot of money. We're talking billions of dollars into getting these changes adopted by schools. They're incentivizing them to follow Title IX and to put the programs in place, regardless of whether there's a lawsuit in place or not. It'd be very difficult to I guess, root out people from taking that money, because we've already taken that money through various forms, like through the Better and Safer Communities Act that was passed by Congress. I think it was last year. And we also have lots of money coming through. I think it's Title IV, Part A, where they're using this money to incentivize the formation of LGBTQ clubs and to implement other, like what they call safe and inclusive welcoming practices. So it's a mess, and we've got to figure out how to extricate ourselves from the federal funds.
Yeah, inclusive unless you're white, unless you're straight, unless you're Christian, unless you're a male. Yeah, then we'll include you. But otherwise, you're excluded, right?
Right. I mean, you're in trouble basically if you're not affirming and if you're not celebrating, then that's considered discriminatory. So it's discrimination to not demonstrate affirmation or celebration. Yeah, it's not okay.
Well, and one thing that I really appreciate about you is, as you mentioned, you and Natalie Klein, you were talking about this and shining a light on this months ago. I would argue one of the first people actually shining a light on this issue months ago, before it was even in the forefront. And I remember then some people saying, oh, that's not true. They're not going to spin Title IX that way. Well, guess what? Here we are. Monica Wilbur, Natalie Klein was right. On record, I'm going to say that you guys were absolutely right about Title IX and what they are attempting to do in our schools right now. It feels that there's been this massive shift the last several years in our education system away from academics. In fact, I think we're seeing some of the lowest scores in academics, and it's now being replaced with instead trying to make our kids these little social justice warriors. I had to pull my own son out of a local charter school here who I thought they were about patriotism, academics. That's what they always prided themselves on. Yet, come to find out, they had massively shifted their focus, as you're saying, with pushing some of these DEI type programs in the classroom, which they do through things like social emotional learning, because it sounds really nice. And that's the other thing I appreciate about you is it takes a certain set of skills to be able to identify these code words that they use, like social emotional learning, to make it sound really flowery and nice. And, oh, we all want our kids to be emotionally stable. This is so great. But we need people like you, Monica, on the school board who can spot this crap from a mile away and say, I don't care how rosy you're making it sound. Let me break down the reality of what this means for our students and for our classrooms. So I guess, what do you see as your main focus going into the school board on bringing back high academics for our students here in Utah?
Well, what I think a lot of parents aren't aware about, you talked about the social emotional learning. Our schools are being shifted by the State Board of Education towards a 21st century learning model. It's a transformational model. And when we talk about transforming a system, the intent for the school system is for it to be transformed irreversibly. And I think that's the kindest, softest, but it's not really a soft way of putting it, because what that means is, the old way of doing things where you have discrete academic areas of, math, English, science, those are disappearing. And we are moving toward what is called a competency-based model that is enabled by one-to-one devices, technology, the Chromebooks, you name it, where kids aren't going to be graded discretely on their objective skills, like in math and English, et cetera. They're going to be graded in these competency areas, which competencies are their subjective, social, emotional learning skills, their mindsets, their values. And so it'll be like, oh, Johnny gets a grade in communication, essentially, with a little bit of math and English and some science thrown in. Johnny gets a grade in how much respect or cultural competence he demonstrates, with a little bit of history and whatever other academic area they want to throw in as well. It is a dangerous model. This is not good for kids. This is not good for society. It's not good for families, because the values and the mindsets and the attitudes that the schools are going to be pushing in kids are those that are prioritized and shaped by the state, not by their families, not by their religions, not by their internal consciences or anything like that. And so it's not good. So, I would love to see the state pull back on a lot of the programs, the state board pull back on a lot of the programs that are pushing this. Portrait of a Graduate, personalized competency-based learning, the shift towards turning schools into these social service welfare centers, where they're providing for mental health services for the kids, where they're providing for and taking over the roles that parents traditionally fulfill in a child's life. So providing food, providing clothing, providing for the kids' medical needs. This is not okay. And a lot of people don't see this coming in, or if they do see it, it's been like the pot in the frog in the pot of boiling water, where it's just happened so incrementally. But we are rapidly moving towards this new model of education, and the state board is the main pusher behind it. We are actually leading out among the states in many of these areas. So that I would love to see that change.
Yeah, it's super worrisome that all of these incumbents you mentioned that are running right now, which, to my knowledge, I think every single one of them probably needs to go. The fact that they're not spotting these things and the danger, some of these things that they're implementing and allowing into the classroom, they can't see the actual underlying agenda coming with some of these policies, to me, is astounding. And unfortunately, we see that at all levels of government, where it's just this almost kind of rubber stamp club where everyone wants to vote in unison and nobody wants to ruffle any feathers. And it's really easy for the underlying agenda to sneak its way in slowly but surely, when you essentially have robots there just at the beck and call, willing to implement all of these things coming from the top down, the U.S. Department of Education, into our children's classrooms. So I want to shift gears for just a second to state convention, because you did come out of state convention, correct, as the Republican nominee.
I came out as the winner, yes, but I am not the outright winner. I had almost 53% of the vote. Yeah, there were some voting anomalies with my race. It was kind of interesting. They had a bunch of breakout races that morning before the call to order at the convention. And mine was the only one that ended up going to a paper ballot because when I went to go vote for my race, along with maybe around 12 to 15 other people, you enter your code on the phone and it just said, congratulations, you voted already. And I hadn't voted.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was kind of interesting, but I did come out the winner from that process. My race attracted a lot of high profile attention. We had the state superintendent in there who brought in members from USBE staff. There were multiple board members in attendance. There were legislators. Practically the entire GOP convention leadership was in there. It was crazy. It was a bit of a circus.
And let's just touch on that for just a minute, because I think the elephant in the room is Natalie Cline and this attack against Natalie Cline that we all saw in her own race coming from the governor as well as lieutenant governor who, rather than disagree better and actually pick up the phone and have a conversation with Natalie Cline to get her side of the story. No, instead they go out full on mob attack style mode, funding her opponent. I mean, doing everything they can. And now you see them attacking people like you or anyone who has any association whatsoever to Natalie Cline. Why do you think that is? Where is this attack mob style mode coming from? Why was your race such a high profile race to where the superintendent thinks they need to show up?
I think there's a huge mob mentality going on. Let's face it, public education in the state of Utah is a huge business. We spent $7.3 billion on it last year. This upcoming year, it's going to be $8.4 billion. We have increased public education funding by 50% over the past 10 years. What are we getting for that money? I don't know. But it's not increased academic scores. It's not increased student well-being. It's not any of the things you would think that money would buy. Class sizes are just as large as ever. Where is this money going? Where is it filtering down? This is something Natalie and I have been really laser focused on, is trying to expose kind of where the money is going, who it is benefiting, who these programs are benefiting, and it's not the people at the bottom. It doesn't filter down into the classrooms. Teachers are frustrated because, they have to be the behavior police, but their hands are tied. They also have to act as kids' ersatz psychotherapists. Education has almost become a sacred cow. There's a lot of money. Cox received, I believe it was $75,000 from the UEA. A lot of outside players. I believe Gail Miller, who, former owner of the Jazz with her husband, billionaire basically, but she's donating to my opponent. Why? You would have to wonder why. What are they protecting? Cox's treatment of Natalie Cline was bizarre, especially considering his own online behavior. Lots of double standards at play. So, I think they know what we're doing, and we're kind of shining a light on the corruption, on the dysfunction, and that is irritating people. We're rocking the boat, but at the same time, this boat's got a lot of holes, and it's not necessarily safe for the kids, for the families. They're taking again education to this direction that's enriching, I think, a lot of outside parties, a lot of outside organizations, but is it working well for the kids? Is it working well for the families? And my answer would be no.
Amen. Yeah, it's absolutely no. You look at mental health among our youth alone. That is at an all-time high, mental health issues in our youth, yet they claim they're throwing all this money at making people feel more included so that there's less suicide and less anxiety, less depression. Well, guess what? It ain't working. And so I love that you're exposing it. I mean, speaking of Gail Miller, I guess us as taxpayers have to fund her $1 billion private business venture Major League Baseball stadium. But it's okay because she can donate to Governor Cox and your opponent and all these other people who will scratch her back in the future to make sure our tax dollars go to fund her private business. So, Monica, we're down to just 40 seconds left. How can people support you and find you? You are phenomenal. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Michelle. You can go to my website, monicawilbur.com. There's a link there where you can donate and volunteer. I've had some wonderful support. There's my debate on there that I had with my opponent. There's some of my endorsements. Just look out the other candidates who are running for the state board. And, thank you. It's for our kids. We got to help our babies.
It's all about the kids. Thanks, Monica. And thanks all for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for being a part of the Michelle Tanner Podcast. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. And always remember to keep exposing truth.
But I won't back down. No, I won't back down.
This has been a production from a podcast studio.